The next day, in Mark chapter 11 and verse 12, they'd come out of Bethany, and he was hungry. Seeing from afar a fig tree having leaves, he went to see if perhaps he would find something on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. The fig tree that you see in the picture is actually a fig tree in Jerusalem. It's right at the pool of Siloam. And when I took this picture, I also wondered, as you see, it's a very lush tree, lots of foliage. I also wondered if there would be any fruit on it. So I examined it, and there was no fruit on it. So I don't know if it was a relative of this tree that Jesus saw, or just if it wasn't the time for fruit either. But the one that Jesus saw was evidently a tree that could have had fruit on it, was big enough to do that, but didn't have fruit on it. And one of the accounts tells us it wasn't really the season for figs. But Jesus curses the tree. In verse 14, let no one eat fruit from you ever again. And his disciples heard that. It's just, again, an interesting incident that happens during Jesus' time here as he's approaching this last week of his earthly ministry before his crucifixion. We're going to hold off, and Mark is going to hold off on telling us the rest of the story for a little while, because that won't happen till the next day when Jesus and his disciples walk by this place again. But just keep this in your mind, that he has cursed this fig tree and no one would eat fruit on it ever again. Now Jesus goes on in to the temple. And in verse 15, when they came to Jerusalem, Jesus went into the temple and began to drive out those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry wares through the temple. Now, we understand from various gospel accounts that this week was a week of the Passover. It was a high feast of the Jews. Jerusalem was just teeming with tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, if not more, Jews who'd come specially for the feast. Sacrifices had to be made. A lot of people were thronging into the temple. And so a lot of these people maybe who traveled from afar would need to purchase sacrifices for the Passover, would need to have their money changed because they'd come from a foreign country and, maybe their money was no good here and they had to have that changed out. And so all of that activity was going on actually in the plaza of the temple. We'll show you a diagram of that in just a minute. But all of that activity is going on. To Jesus, this was his Father's house. Here he is, surely and truly the Son of God, as he's demonstrated himself to be. And they were basically making Walmart out of his Father's house, where people were just buying and selling and doing all sorts of things that don't belong in a place that's designed to honor the God of the universe. This grieves the Lord, no doubt, greatly. And so he drives out the buyers and the sellers and the money changers. He turns over the tables. He doesn't allow anyone to carry wares through the temple. There's nothing wrong with buying and selling things. Sometimes if you travel, you need to have your money changed. Sometimes you might appreciate a vendor who has something to sell you when you're far from home and you haven't brought that item with you. That's not the point of all of this. Business is fine enterprise and accepted and approved by God, but you can't mix that with holy things. You can't trample on the very temple of God to do your daily business, so to speak. And that's what Jesus is saying here. They have profaned his temple. And he goes on, of course, and tells them his house should be a house of prayer for all nations. They had made it a den of thieves. There was apparently dishonesty going on in the money changing and the selling of the things. The point is, they turned the temple into something that was a far cry from what God had designed it to be and wanted it to be, something to honor him, to be a holy place, not to be run over with the things of this world. So when this happens, of course, the chief priests who are in charge of the temple services and the leaders of the Jews, here the scribes and the chief priests, heard it. They sought how they might destroy him, for they feared him, because all the people were astonished at his teaching. The leaders of the Jews are very upset that he's messed up their temple, that he's disrupted things that were going on there. They're concerned that he's getting a following. They're concerned that people are listening to him. They fear the multitudes, and so they don't want to do anything to Jesus in front of the multitudes, but it's becoming evident just off the bat here at the very beginning of this last week of his life that they are going to be very antagonistic to him. They're not going to like what he does and what he says, and they're going to try mightily to bring him down, and they'll do so. They'll have him crucified, of course, by Friday of that week. The text tells us that when evening had come, he went out of the city. Here you see a scale model of the temple. We have descriptions from ancient times of what the temple looked like from human history. And putting those together, I think most scholars believe we can have a really accurate replica model of how the temple would have looked when it stood in Jesus' day. And this is, I think, a pretty accurate model of that. Here's a drawing that somebody has done. This is the court of the Gentiles, the plaza area where all this buying and selling no doubt was going on, where Jesus had cleansed this out. So you can kind of picture that in your mind. And Jesus does that, and then he goes out again out of the city to spend the night in Bethany. In the morning, in verse 20, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up by the roots. And Peter, remembering, said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered away. It's really an amazing thing. Even if you cut a tree all the way down, you wouldn't think it would completely wither by, the next day. It would take several days probably for that to happen. But here, this tree is completely, was still standing, still with perhaps its roots in the ground, but completely withered away, dried up all the way down to the roots. Jesus tells them some important lessons, things to learn from the fact that he could say to this fig tree, you're never going to bear fruit again, and that it withered away as a result of that. He gives them some important lessons about the nature of faith and its relationship to prayer. And the first thing that he wants them to know is that they need to have faith in God. If Jesus, with the power of God, could do this, and the many other things, of course, that he'd done before them in his earthly ministry, the power of God is something to believe in, something to trust in. He says, have faith in God. For assuredly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes those things he says will be done, he will have whatever he says. So no matter how impossible it seems, if you believe it, and of course that's not the only stipulation, it has to be according to the will of God. You need to be a righteous person, a righteous child of his. But the point is, if you're believing that what you're asking God he can do and will do if it is according to his will, it's going to happen. That's the promise that Jesus makes. There's the power of faith and the power of prayer at work, putting a mountain into the sea. He says, therefore, I say to you, whatever things you ask when you pray, believe that you will receive them and you will have them. So important to do that. In this time when we're praying fervently for so many serious things, for our spiritual health, for our physical health, for the status of our nation, both spiritually and economically, and for the world as far as that goes. So many serious things we're praying about, not to mention the many things that are affecting our personal lives right now. So important that we believe that Jesus' words here are true, that whatever we ask, we'll receive if we believe that. And he says, whenever you stand praying, if you have anything against anyone, forgive him, that your Father in heaven may also forgive your trespasses. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. Forgiving others empowers your prayers for forgiveness. And you need to understand that. You need to believe that. You need to be assured that you can receive forgiveness from God as you meet his conditions of pardon. But first, you must pardon others. And you can be assured that if you don't pardon others, you won't be forgiven. Your prayer for forgiveness will have no power, no effect. This is really an important teaching on the nature of faith and forgiveness and prayer. that Jesus is sharing with his disciples here. So several really great lessons that Jesus draws from what he did to the fig tree while he has the disciples' attention, and they've not yet entered into the city for the day's teaching. I think he wanted to share these important lessons with them plainly, and he does so. He goes in then